I'm Isla, 26 female. I'm a freelance graphic designer, and for the past few years, I've been living in a small but cozy apartment in the city, just making ends meet while building my client base. It's been a grind, but a satisfying one. The plan was always simple: save up, build my portfolio, and eventually move somewhere more permanent. My family's betrayal wasn't just a simple broken promise. It was a calculated act of cruelty that left me stranded, forcing me to see them for who they truly were for the first time in my life. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The decision to move back home wasn't one I took lightly. For 3 years, I had cherished my independence. My one-bedroom apartment, though small, was my sanctuary. It was where I'd celebrated landing my first big freelance contract, mourned the loss of a beloved pet, and pulled countless all-nighters fueled by coffee and creative energy. But my landlord, a faceless corporation that had recently bought the building, had decided to hike the rent by an astronomical 40%. There was simply no way I could afford it, not without sacrificing my emergency fund and taking on unsustainable debt. My freelance income was steady, but it wasn't survive a 40% rent increase steady. I called my mother, Helen, in a state of controlled panic. Her voice, usually a little distant, was surprisingly warm and reassuring. "Of course, sweetie," she said, the words a balm to my frayed nerves. "Your old room is waiting for you. Come home. You can stay as long as you need to get back on your feet. Save up some money, no rent, no pressure." The relief was immense, washing over me like a tidal wave. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? She was my mother. The plan was set. I would give my 60-day notice, pack up my life, and move back into my childhood bedroom at the end of August. My brother, Ethan, still lived at home, but the house was a spacious 4-bedroom, so there was more than enough room for all of us. I spent the next 2 months meticulously packing, selling furniture that wouldn't fit, and dreaming of the financial breathing room I would finally have. I imagined setting up a small design corner in my old room, saving aggressively for a down payment on a condo, and maybe even taking a real vacation for the first time in years. My family, I thought, was my safety net. The calls with my mom during this period were frequent and filled with logistics. "I cleared out your closet for you," she'd tell me. "We're so excited to have you back." We talked about family dinners, about me helping her with her garden, about all the little things that would make it feel like home again. My dad, a long-haul truck driver, was on the road most of the time, so my mom and my brother were the ones I coordinated with. Ethan, 2 years my senior at 28, was, well, Ethan. He was my parents' golden child, the one who could do no wrong. He'd flitted from one brilliant business idea to the next since graduating college, never holding a real job for more than a few months. His current venture was some kind of fitness influencer brand, though he seemed to spend more time taking selfies with protein powder than actually building a business. When I told him I was moving back, his response was a non-committal grunt. "Sure, whatever." "Just stay out of my way," he'd said over the phone. I brushed it off. That was just Ethan. The last week of August arrived. My apartment was a sea of cardboard boxes, each one labeled with my neat, designer's handwriting. My lease officially ended on a Saturday. I'd arranged to move my things on Friday afternoon, giving myself the weekend to unpack and settle in before the new work week began. I called my mom on Thursday night to confirm the final details. "Hey, Mom, just confirming for tomorrow around 3 p.m. I have the U-Haul booked. Can't wait to be home." There was a pause on the other end of the line. It was just a second too long, a tiny crack in the smooth facade of our plan. "Oh, Isla, about that," she began, her voice suddenly strained. "Something's come up. Your father and I have been talking, and Ethan, well, he really needs the space." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "What do you mean, he needs the space? He has his own room. I'm moving into my old room." "Well, yes," she said, her tone becoming placating, as if speaking to a child. "But he's getting really serious about his fitness business. He needs a dedicated space for a home gym, for his equipment, for filming content. Your old room has the best light." I was speechless. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A home gym? You're giving my room away for a home gym? Mom, I'm packed. My lease is up in 2 days. I have nowhere else to go. You promised. Now don't be dramatic, Isla, she snapped, her brief moment of warmth gone, replaced by the familiar defensiveness she always adopted when Ethan's needs were in question. We just thought you'd be more understanding. You're resourceful. You'll figure something out. Ethan's career is at a very critical stage right now. He needs our support. The conversation devolved from there. I pleaded, I reasoned, I reminded her of her promise. Each argument I made was met with a wall of excuses and justifications for Ethan's needs. It wasn't just a room, it was a business investment. It wasn't just a broken promise, it was a change of circumstances. The final blow came when she said, "Honestly, Isla, having you here would just be a distraction for him. It's for the best." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. The boxes surrounding me, once symbols of a hopeful new beginning, now felt like the walls of a tomb. I had been so naive. I had believed in the idea of a family safety net, but it had been yanked away without a second thought, leaving me in a free fall. I had 2 days to find a place to live, with most of my belongings already in a rental truck and my bank account nowhere near healthy enough for a sudden security deposit and first month's rent. The welcome mat hadn't just been pulled, it had been set on fire and thrown back in my face. The panic was real now, cold and sharp. I sat on the floor amidst the wreckage of my plans, the silence of my empty apartment deafening, and wondered what on earth I was going to do. The next 24 hours were a blur of frantic phone calls and desperate online searches. Every affordable apartment listing was already gone. Friends I reached out to were sympathetic, but their spare rooms were already occupied by roommates or used as home offices. The only options were sketchy, month-to-month sublets in bad neighborhoods or exorbitantly priced extended-stay hotels that would bleed my savings dry in a week. The humiliation was a heavy cloak. At 26, I was essentially homeless, not because of some catastrophic failure on my part, but because my brother wanted a place to lift weights. I tried calling my mom one more time on Friday morning, hoping that a night of sleep might have given her some perspective. It was a foolish hope. Ethan answered her phone. "What do you want, Isla?" he asked, his voice dripping with annoyance. I could hear the clanking of metal in the background. "Ethan, I need to talk to Mom. This is serious. I have to be out of my apartment by tomorrow." "She's busy," he grunted. "Look, I already started moving my stuff into the room. Got a great deal on a power rack. You can't just expect to waltz back in here and disrupt my life, my career." The sheer audacity of his words struck me dumb. "Your career? You don't have a career, Ethan. You have a hobby funded by Mom and Dad. I have a real job, real bills, and a lease that is ending because they promised me I could come home." "Sounds like a you problem," he said, and the line went dead. I sank onto a box, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, hard rage. It wasn't just that they had broken a promise. It was the casual cruelty of it, the complete disregard for my well-being in favor of my brother's latest whim. I was the responsible one, the one who had moved out at 23, paid my own bills, and never asked for a handout. Ethan, on the other hand, had been living rent-free since college, his car insurance, phone bill, and credit card debt all quietly handled by our parents. I had always known he was the favorite, but I had never understood the depths of it until that moment. I wasn't just their daughter, I was a contingency, an afterthought. Ethan was their legacy, their project. A dumbbell had literally taken precedence over me. Defeated, I began loading the U-Haul. Each box was a lead weight, a testament to my misplaced trust. My couch, my desk, my entire life, shoved into the back of a truck with no destination. By late afternoon, the apartment was empty, a hollow shell echoing my own sense of desolation. I did a final sweep, handed the keys to the superintendent, and sat in the driver's seat of the rental truck, the engine rumbling beneath me. My car was parked behind it, ready to follow. But where was I going to go? I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over the names of more distant relatives, my pride warring with my desperation. Just as I was about to give up and find a cheap motel for the night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't immediately recognize, but the message made my heart stop. It read, "Isla, it's your Aunt Diana, your mom's sister. I heard what happened. Don't you dare spend a night in a motel. Your cousin Nina has a spare room and she'd be thrilled to have you. And just so you know, we know how they've been treating you for years. Call me." Aunt Diana was the quiet one in the family, a librarian who always brought books instead of loud opinions to family gatherings. We weren't particularly close, but she had always been kind, with a knowing look in her eyes whenever my mother would gush about Ethan's latest genius idea while glossing over any of my own achievements. The message felt like a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. The last part of her text, "We know how they've been treating you," sent a shiver down my spine. It was a validation I didn't even know I was craving. Someone else saw it. I wasn't crazy. My fingers trembled as I dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," she said, her voice full of a warmth my own mother's had lacked. "Helen and we don't see eye to eye on much these days, especially when it comes to her coddling of Ethan. Nina is already making up the guest room. She lives about 30 minutes from your old place. I'll text you the address." Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed finally streamed down my face. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Diana said gently. "Just get over here safely. We're your family too, the real kind." Driving to my cousin Nina's apartment was surreal. I followed the GPS through unfamiliar neighborhoods, the U-Haul lumbering behind me like a sad, metal beast of burden. When I arrived, Nina, who I hadn't seen in over a year, was waiting on the curb with a bright, welcoming smile. She was my age, a paralegal with a sharp wit and a no-nonsense attitude. She wrapped me in a tight hug. "Forget them," she said, her voice fierce. "Their loss. His home gym will be collecting dust in 6 months, and you'll be thriving. Now let's get your stuff inside." I ordered pizza. That night, as Nina and I hauled boxes up to her spacious 2-bedroom apartment, a new feeling began to settle in my chest, pushing past the hurt and humiliation. It was a slow-burning anger, clarified by the kindness I was now being shown. My aunt and cousin didn't just offer me a room, they offered me perspective. They saw the injustice. They confirmed that what my parents and brother did wasn't just a last-minute change of plans, it was the culmination of years of blatant favoritism and disrespect. Lying in bed in Nina's guest room, the scent of lavender from the fresh linens she'd put out filling the air, I didn't feel homeless anymore. I felt armed. My family had made their choice. They had chosen a power rack over their daughter. And I decided, in that quiet, safe room, that they were going to regret it. The first week at Nina's was a period of decompression and cautious rebuilding. She was an incredible host, giving me space when I needed it, but always there with a glass of wine or a listening ear at the end of the day. Her apartment was clean, modern, and blessedly quiet, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy I knew my childhood home possessed. Slowly, I began to unpack, not just my physical belongings, but the emotional baggage of the last few days. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my gut, but it was now accompanied by a sharp, piercing clarity. My mom tried to call a few times. I ignored the calls, letting them go to voicemail. Her messages were a masterclass in manipulation, dripping with false concern. "Isla, honey, I'm just calling to see where you ended up. I'm worried about you." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of her role in my predicament. It was all about soothing her own conscience. My father sent a single, dismissive text. "Your mother said you found somewhere else. Let us know if you need anything." The offer was so hollow, it was insulting. The real catalyst, however, came from Aunt Diana. She came over for dinner that first weekend, bringing a homemade lasagna and a bottle of red wine. After we ate, she sat me down at the kitchen table, her expression serious. "Isla," she began, "there's something you need to know. The reason I wasn't surprised by what Helen did is because this isn't just about favoritism. It's about money, a lot of it." I must have looked confused because she sighed and continued. "Your grandparents, my parents, left a considerable amount of money in trust funds for their grandchildren. For you, Ethan, and Nina. The stipulations were clear. We, the parents, were the trustees, and the funds were to be used for major life events, a down payment on a house, starting a legitimate business, or educational expenses. They were not to be touched for anything else until each of you turned 30, at which point you would gain full control. Nina, who had been quietly listening, nodded. My mom and dad gave me access to my trust statements every year. They wanted me to learn about managing it. I assume Aunt Helen did the same for you. I shook my head, a sense of dread creeping in. No, I knew there was something from Grandpa, but Mom always said it was a little nest egg for later. She was always so vague about it. She said she was managing it for me and Ethan and that we shouldn't worry about it. Aunt Diana's eyes were filled with pity. Isla, I'm afraid she hasn't been managing it. At least not for you. About a year ago, I was helping your mother with some online banking issues. She's terrible with technology. I accidentally saw a transaction history. She's been pulling money from the trusts. Specifically, from yours. The room spun. What, how, why? For Ethan, Diana said flatly, his businesses. The failed food truck idea 2 years ago, that was funded by your trust. The expensive coding boot camp he dropped out of after a month, your trust. His new car last year, which he claimed he got a great deal on, your trust. Helen has been systematically draining your inheritance to fund his lifestyle while leaving his untouched. She's been shuffling money around, trying to cover her tracks. The betrayal was so profound it left me breathless. This went so far beyond giving up a room. My mother had been actively stealing from me for years, robbing my future to finance my brother's failures. All those times I struggled to make rent, carefully budgeting every dollar, eating ramen for a week to afford a new piece of software for work. She knew. She knew there was a safety net that was rightfully mine, and she had not only hidden it from me, but had handed it over to my brother piece by piece. How do you know she was taking it from my account and not his? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Because the trust your grandfather set up has our names on it as co-trustees in case of an emergency, Diana explained. Helen is the primary, but I get secondary notifications for any withdrawals over a certain amount. She must have forgotten. I've seen 3 major withdrawals from the Isla M Trust in the past 2 years. I haven't seen a single one from Ethan's. She paused, then looked me straight in the eye. She justified it by telling your father that you were the responsible one who didn't need it, while Ethan needed the help to get started. She convinced him it was for the best. Nina stood up and walked over to her desk, retrieving a file folder. She was a paralegal, and her organizational skills were second to none. After Mom told me what she suspected, I did a little digging, she said, her tone all business. It's surprisingly easy to find public records if you know where to look. Ethan is listed as the sole proprietor of 3 failed businesses. He's also the registered owner of a car with no lien on it, meaning it was paid for in cash. There's no way he could afford that without a significant infusion of capital. She laid a few printed documents on the table. This isn't just unfair, Isla. What your mother has done is likely illegal. It's a breach of her fiduciary duty as a trustee. You have been a victim of financial abuse. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Financial abuse. It sounded so clinical, so sterile for something that felt like a knife twisting in my heart, my own mother. I thought back to every conversation, every time she'd praise me for being so independent and frugal. It wasn't a compliment, it was an excuse. She was praising me for not needing the money she was actively stealing from me. The home gym wasn't the ultimate betrayal. It was just the sloppy, arrogant final act that exposed the entire rotten foundation of our family. The anger that had been simmering inside me now erupted into a full-blown inferno. This wasn't just about getting even anymore. This was about getting justice. This was about taking back what was mine. The information from Aunt Diana and Nina lit a fire under me. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound, but it was now overshadowed by a cold, methodical resolve. My mother and brother hadn't just disrespected me, they had conspired to steal my financial future. They believed I was too timid, too forgiving, to ever do anything about it. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. The first step was to get undeniable proof. Suspicions and second-hand accounts wouldn't be enough. I needed official documents, statements, a paper trail that would be impossible for them to deny. This is where Nina's expertise as a paralegal became invaluable. She was my strategist, my guide through a world of legal jargon and bureaucratic red tape that I would have been lost in on my own. "Okay, first things first," she said, sitting across from me at her dining table, which we had converted into our command center. Laptops were open, and a fresh pot of coffee was brewing. "You need to get control of the trust. As a beneficiary over the age of 25, you have the legal right to request a full accounting from the trustee, your mother. But we don't want to tip her off just yet. A formal request will make her suspicious and could give her time to hide things." Instead, we opted for a more subtle approach. "The bank that holds the trust is the key," Nina explained. "Your grandfather was old-fashioned. I'll bet he set it up with the same local bank your family Y has used for decades." She was right. I remembered the name of the bank from the little passbook savings account they'd set up for me as a kid. The next morning, armed with my birth certificate, social security card, and driver's license, I walked into the main branch of that bank. I was a nervous wreck, my heart pounding against my ribs. I had rehearsed my story with Nina a dozen times. I approached a personal banker, a pleasant-looking woman in her late 40s, and explained that I was trying to get my financial documents in order for my future. I told her I knew my grandfather had set up a trust for me years ago, and that I wanted to get copies of all the statements for my records, as I was now of an age where I needed to start planning seriously. I intentionally played up the responsible daughter angle my mother had used against me. "My mom has been managing it for me, but she's not great with paperwork, and I want to take some of the burden off her," I said with a sweet, innocent smile. The banker was incredibly helpful. She located the trust account easily. As she printed years' worth of statements, she made small talk. "It's so nice to see a young person taking an interest in their finances," she commented. "Your mother must be proud." The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I walked out of that bank with a thick manila envelope that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Back at Nina's apartment, we spread the documents across the table. It was worse than I could have imagined. Page after page detailed a systematic siphoning of my funds. There were large, lump sum withdrawals corresponding exactly to the timeline of Ethan's failed ventures. $20,000 withdrawn in March of 2022, right before he launched his gourmet food truck that lasted 4 months. $15,000 in January 2023 for the immersive coding experience. And the most galling of all, $35,000 withdrawn last September, which coincided perfectly with the purchase of his brand new sports coupe. In total, my mother had taken over $70,000 from my trust fund. Meanwhile, the statements for Ethan's trust, which the banker had helpfully printed as well thinking, she was just giving me a complete family portfolio, showed nothing but steady, untouched growth. Seeing it all in black and white was sickening. The lies, the manipulation, it was all there. My mother had falsified reasons for the withdrawals, using loopholes like educational expenses for his boot camp and business startup capital, things the trust allowed but were meant for me. She had methodically stripped my assets while leaving her precious son's nest egg to flourish. "We've got her," Nina said, her voice a low, angry hum. "This is a flagrant breach of fiduciary duty. This is rock-solid evidence." But evidence of the crime wasn't enough for me. I wanted to understand the full scope of their deception. The bank statements were the what. I needed the why and the how. My focus shifted to my parents' personal finances. My father worked hard, but I knew a truck driver's salary couldn't possibly support Ethan's lavish lifestyle on its own. They had to be funneling money to him in other ways, too. My opportunity came unexpectedly. My mom, in another attempt to feign concern, sent me a text. "Isla, I know you're upset, but your father is going to be home for a week starting Tuesday. He wants to have a family dinner on Saturday to clear the air. Please come. It's important." I knew this wasn't an olive branch, it was a trap. They wanted to get me in a room, guilt-trip me, and smooth things over with empty promises so they could continue their charade. But it was also an opportunity. Nina and I formulated a plan. I would agree to the dinner. But before Saturday, while my mom was distracted with my dad being home, I would need to get into the house. Aunt Diana provided the key. She called my mom on Wednesday, feigning a minor crisis. "Helen, my basement is flooding. I know you have that great wet vac. Can I possibly borrow it? I'm in a panic." My mom, eager to play the helpful sister and perhaps create a little goodwill by proxy, readily agreed. Diana went over, and while my mom was busy dragging the vacuum out of the garage, Diana did exactly what we had planned. She snagged the spare key to the house that was always hidden under a loose brick by the back porch. That Friday, while my parents were out for a welcome home lunch for my dad, I used that key. My heart was hammering as I slipped into the house I grew up in. It felt alien, hostile territory. I went straight to my father's small office in the basement. It was where they kept all their important files. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. In a file cabinet marked Finances, I found their tax returns, bank statements, and credit card bills. I quickly took photos of everything with my phone. The documents told a story of reckless spending and mounting debt, all centered around Ethan. There were Reddit card statements with thousands of dollars in charges for designer clothes, high-end electronics, and expensive restaurant meals, all for him. They had taken out a second mortgage on the house 2 years ago, a detail my mother had conveniently failed to mention. The amount, roughly equivalent to what Ethan had needed for his down payment on the car after my trust fund money ran out. They weren't just enabling him, they were bankrupting themselves for him. They were drowning in debt to keep their golden child afloat, all while stealing from me to plug the holes. I got out of the house just as quietly as I had entered, the spare key returned to its hiding spot. Back at Nina's, we laid out the new evidence alongside the trust fund statements. The picture was complete. It was a comprehensive portrait of deception, theft, and pathetic financial mismanagement. I finally had everything I needed. The paper trail of lies was long and damning, and I was going to use every inch of it to burn their comfortable world to the ground. With a mountain of undeniable evidence in my possession, the burning rage I felt began to cool into something far more dangerous: cold, calculated purpose. A simple confrontation wasn't enough. An angry phone call or a tearful argument would achieve nothing. They would deny, deflect, and gaslight me, just as they always had. No, this required a more strategic approach. I didn't just want an apology, I wanted consequences. I wanted to dismantle the entire system of comfort and entitlement they had built around my brother, brick by brick. Nina and I spent the next few days outlining the plan. It had to be precise, with each step timed perfectly to cause maximum impact. My goal wasn't just to get my money back. It was to force my parents to face the reality of the financial ruin they were heading towards by propping up their failure of a son. The first phase of the plan involved the trust fund. On Nina's advice, I didn't go straight to a lawyer to sue my mother. That would be a long, expensive process. Instead, we targeted the bank itself. We drafted a formal, impeccably worded letter, citing the specific articles of the trust agreement that outline the trustee's fiduciary duty. The letter detailed the unauthorized withdrawals, attached copies of the statements showing the funds being used for non-permissible expenses, like a car, and stated that the bank, by allowing these transactions without proper due diligence, was partially liable for the mismanagement of the trust. We made it clear that if immediate action wasn't taken to investigate and rectify the situation, we would be escalating the matter not only to a lawsuit, but also to banking regulators. "This will terrify them," Nina explained, a grim smile on her face. "Banks have entire departments dedicated to avoiding regulatory complaints and lawsuits. The moment they see breach of fiduciary duty, alarms will go off. They will freeze the account and launch an internal investigation immediately. This takes the power completely out of your mother's hands." I hand-delivered the letter and the packet of evidence to the bank's branch manager, the same day as the scheduled family dinner. I requested a signed receipt confirming they had received the documents, which they provided. Phase 1 was in motion. The financial pipeline from my trust was now officially severed. Phase 2 was more personal. It targeted Ethan's illusion of success. His entire identity was wrapped up in being a fitness influencer, but his online presence was pathetic. He had a few hundred followers, mostly bot, and his content was lazy and uninspired. His real currency was the expensive gear and apparel he flaunted, all bought with my, and our parents' money. So I decided to take away his stage. Using a throwaway email address, I contacted the high-end fitness equipment company from which he had just purchased his new power rack and other gym gear. I knew from the credit card statements that my parents had bought it for him using a card that was nearly maxed out. In my email, I posed as a concerned family friend, writing a carefully crafted message. "I'm writing to you out of concern," I wrote. "A young man named Ethan, living at their address, recently purchased a significant amount of equipment from your company. I happen to know his family is undergoing severe financial distress and that he used a credit card that he does not have the means to pay off. I fear he may be planning to default on the payment or even attempt a fraudulent chargeback. I thought you should be aware of the potential risk associated with this large purchase." It was a gamble, but it was a calculated one. Companies are wary of fraud and difficult customers. A large, potentially risky transaction might trigger them to take preemptive action. At the very least, it would put a black mark next to his name. Phase 3 was the subtlest, and in some ways the most devastating. T was aimed at the foundation of their comfort, their house. I knew from the documents I'd photographed that they had recently refinanced their second mortgage. I also knew they were frequently late on payments, incurring fees and damaging their credit. So, I took the information about their precarious financial state, the maxed-out credit cards, the double mortgage, the late payments, and packaged it anonymously. I sent it in a plain envelope, with no return address, to the home insurance company that held their policy. The package included a simple, typed note. "For your risk assessment, file regarding policy number for the property at their address. The homeowners are currently over-leveraged and may represent a higher liability. Insurance companies are all about mitigating risk. Any information suggesting a client is in financial trouble could trigger a policy review or, at the very least, a significant premium increase upon renewal." It was a quiet, insidious seed of doubt planted in a system they relied on. With all the pieces in place, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in weeks. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of their comeuppance. They had pushed me out, underestimated me, and stolen from me. They had created a comfortable bubble for my brother, funded by lies and my future. I had just pricked that bubble with 3 very sharp needles. All that was left was to go to dinner and watch it burst. I picked out my outfit for the evening, something professional and understated. I wanted to look like someone who was in complete control. Because for the first time in my life, when it came to my family, I finally was. I walked into my parents' house that Saturday evening feeling like a stranger in a painfully familiar land. The air was thick with a cloying, artificial pleasantness. My mother, Helen, rushed to greet me, her face a mask of strained warmth. "Isla, you came, we've been so worried." She tried to hug me, but I took a small step back, offering a cool, polite smile instead. The move was subtle, but it landed. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. My father was sitting in his usual recliner, the television muted. He gave me a gruff nod. "Isla, good to see you." He sounded tired, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. And then there was Ethan. He was leaning against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed over his chest, a smug look on his face. He was wearing an expensive athleisure outfit, clearly meant to project the image of a successful fitness guru. Decided to stop being dramatic and show up, he sneered. "I came because Mom said Dad wanted to clear the air," I said, my voice even and calm. I directed my gaze at my father. "Is that what we're doing?" Dinner was a tense affair. My mother chattered nervously about neighborhood gossip, while Ethan bragged about his new gym equipment and the content he was planning to create. I ate in silence, offering one-word answers when spoken to. I was a coiled spring, waiting for the perfect moment. It came with dessert. My mother brought out a store-bought apple pie and served it with a flourish. As she set a slice in front of me, she said, "Isla, honey, we need to talk about what happened. I know you feel that we broke a promise, but you have to understand. Ethan's career is finally taking off. We had to support him." I put down my fork and looked her directly in the eye. Support him or finance him? The question hung in the air. Helen's smile faltered. That's not a very nice thing to say. "Isn't it?" I replied, my voice dangerously quiet. I reached into my purse and pulled out a neatly organized folder, the one Nina had helped me prepare. "Let's talk about support. Let's talk about the $70,000 you supported him with from my trust fund." The color drained from my mother's face. My father sat bolt upright in his chair. Ethan just looked confused. "What are you talking about?" he scoffed. "You don't have a trust fund." "Oh, I do," I said, sliding the first document across the table. It was the summary page of my trust account, showing the original balance and the current, depleted one. "We both do, Ethan. The difference is, Mom has been systematically stealing from mine for the last 3 years to pay for your failures." I laid out the next document, the statement showing the $20,000 withdrawal for his food truck, then the next for his coding boot camp, and then the last, the big one, for his car. With each page, my mother grew paler and my father's face darkened with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "Helen, what is this?" my father asked, his voice a low rumble. "She's lying, she's making it up," my mother stammered, her eyes darting around wildly. "Am I?" I continued, my voice gaining strength. "Then maybe you can explain this." I slid over the credit card statements, with Ethan's extravagant purchases circled in red. "And this," I said, producing the documents for the second mo. "RT Gage, you're drowning in debt. You've gambled your financial security, your home, and my entire inheritance on him." I finally turned my attention to Ethan, who was staring at the papers, his smug expression replaced by one of disbelief. "And you, Ethan, your entire life is a lie. Your career is a joke funded by stolen money. You're not an entrepreneur, you're a parasite." His face contorted with rage. "You have no right." "I have every right," I shot back, my voice finally rising. "You stood there and told me my homelessness was a you problem, while you were literally building a gym in my room with money that should have been for my future. The entitlement, the absolute selfishness, it's breathtaking." Just then, as if on cue, my mother's phone began to buzz insistently on the counter. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Finally, she snatched it up, her hand shaking. "What?" she hissed into the phone. Her face went from pale to ghostly white as she listened. I knew who it was. It was the bank, the fraud department. The consequences were beginning to arrive, right on schedule. "My account, frozen," she whispered, her voice cracking. "An investigation, but why?" I answered for them. "It's called a breach of fiduciary duty, Mom. I sent them copies of everything you see here. They're launching a full investigation into your mismanagement of my trust. You won't be able to touch a single cent of my money, or Ethan's, ever again." My father stood up, his face ashen. He looked from the papers to his wife, to his son, and finally to me. The obliviousness was gone, replaced by a devastating understanding. He had been lied to, manipulated by his wife to favor one child at the cost of the other. As my mother was still stammering on the phone, Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. It was the equipment company. He answered it, a nervous tremor in his voice. I could hear the tinny sound of a stern voice on the other end. Ethan's face fell. "What do you mean, a hold on the order? A potential fraud alert? No, the payment went through." He was lying. The charge was likely still pending, and my email had done its job. The company was freezing the delivery of his precious gym equipment until they could verify the payment, which they wouldn't be able to do from a maxed-out card. The calculated collapse was happening right in front of me. The pillars of their comfortable, deceitful world were crumbling in real time. I stood up, my own dinner untouched. "I'll be recovering every cent you stole, Mom, with interest. My lawyer will be in touch." I looked at my father. "I'm sorry you were caught in the middle of this, Dad, but you let it happen." I walked out of that house without a backward glance, leaving behind the wreckage of their lies. The cold night air felt clean and fresh. For the first time, the truth hadn't just been spoken, it had been served with undeniable, documented proof, and it was colder and more satisfying than any dessert they could have ever offered. The weeks following that disastrous dinner were a whirlwind of legal and personal resolutions. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for my family, but for me, it was the start of a new, unburdened life. The bank's investigation was swift and brutal. Faced with incontrovertible proof of her misconduct, my mother had no choice but to relinquish her role as trustee for both my and Ethan's accounts. A court-appointed fiduciary was assigned to manage the funds until we turned 30. My mother was also forced to sign a legally binding agreement to repay the $70,000 she had taken from me. It wasn't a lump sum, they simply didn't have it, but a structured repayment plan that would garnish a portion of my father's wages and her retirement pension for years to come. Every month, I would receive a payment, a stark reminder of the consequences of their actions. The news about the second mortgage and their staggering credit card debt was a brutal wake-up call for my father. The dynamic in their house shifted permanently. From what Aunt Diana told me, the shouting matches were epic. My father, a man who had worked his entire life to provide for his family, was confronted with the reality that his wife's enablement of their son had put their home and their retirement in jeopardy. The blinders were off, and he could no longer ignore Ethan's failures or my mother's manipulations. Ethan's world imploded. The fitness equipment company, spooked by the fraud alert and unable to secure payment, canceled the order entirely. His dream of a home gym vanished. With the family finances in ruins and his access to any trust money cut off, the gravy train came to a screeching halt. My father, now holding the purse strings, gave him an ultimatum: get a real job and start paying rent or get out. The last I heard, Ethan was working a stocking job at a local grocery store. His influencer dreams turned to dust. The smug entitlement was gone, replaced by a sullen resentment that I wore with a certain degree of pride. As for their house, the anonymous tip to the insurance company had the desired effect. At their next renewal, their premium nearly doubled, citing their high-risk financial profile. It was another financial straw on an already broken camel's back. They were forced to sell the house I grew up in, the house they had chosen over me, and downsize to a small, rented townhouse on the other side of the state. The sale of the house was just enough to clear their debts, leaving them with almost nothing to show for decades of work. While their world was collapsing, mine was being built. I stayed with Nina for a few more months, saving every penny I made and every repayment installment I received. My freelance business began to flourish. Freed from the constant, low-level stress of my family's drama, my creativity soared. I landed 2 major long-term clients, allowing me to build a stable and substantial income. 6 months after that fateful weekend, I used a portion of the repaid money from my trust, combined with my own hard-earned savings, to put a down payment on a beautiful condominium in a part of the city I had always dreamed of living in. It had a small balcony perfect for morning coffee and a second bedroom that I turned into a bright, airy home studio. It was mine. Every square inch of it was earned through my own resilience and hard work. My relationship with Aunt Diana and Nina deepened into something truly special. They became the family I had always needed, supportive, honest, and respectful. We had regular dinners, celebrated holidays together, and built a bond forged in loyalty and mutual admiration. They had been my lifeline, and now they were my foundation. I have not spoken to my mother or brother since that night. My father has reached out a few times with short, sorrowful texts. He has apologized for his blindness to the situation, but I know that true reconciliation is a long way off if it ever happens at all. The trust was shattered too completely. I don't hate them. I simply don't think about them. They are characters in a past chapter of my life, a story of betrayal that, ironically, set me on the path to true independence and happiness. Sometimes, when I'm working in my sunny new studio, I think about that packed U-Haul and the feeling of absolute despair as I sat with nowhere to go. It's a stark reminder that sometimes, the worst moments of our lives are not endings, but violent, necessary beginnings. They kicked me out so my brother could have a home gym. In the end, their actions forced me to build a home, a career, and a life far better than anything they could have ever imagined for me. And for that, I suppose I should be grateful. They didn't just give my room away, they gave me my freedom.